They laughed at how this cat walked, but they didn't know the truth. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement of Ruther's Market parking lot. It was precisely 10:30 when the grey cat appeared, as he did every day, emerging from between two parked cars like a wisp of fog. His walk immediately caught the eye of anyone who happened to be looking. There was something decidedly off about it. His hips seemed misaligned, his back legs trembled with each step, and his entire body swayed as if he might topple over at any moment. "Look, Mom, that cat walks funny," a little boy called out, pointing and giggling. His mother glanced up from her shopping list and smiled indulgently. "Some cats are just different, honey," she said, not really paying attention as she steered her cart toward the entrance. The employees of Ruther's Market had nicknamed him Tilt weeks ago. The name had spread quickly through the small town of Millfield, where even the smallest oddities became topics of conversation at the diner counter or during church socials. "Here comes Tilt," said Rick, one of the bag boys, nudging his co-worker. "Watch this." He hunched his shoulders and took a few exaggerated wobbling steps, his arms held awkwardly at his sides. His imitation earned hearty laughs from the smokers gathered near the employee entrance. If Tilt noticed the mockery, he gave no indication. His golden eyes remained fixed ahead, focused on some invisible destination. He never meowed, never begged. He simply made his way across the parking lot with deliberate, painful-looking steps, heading to the small flower stand beside the market entrance. The flower stand was a simple wooden structure, just a counter with a weathered awning that provided shade for the buckets of daisies, carnations, and seasonal blooms. Behind the counter sat Darlene Ellis, a woman whose 69 years had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth. Her silver hair was always neatly pinned back, and she wore cardigans even in the warmer months. There was a stillness about her that matched the quiet beauty of her flowers. Unlike the others, Darlene never laughed at Tilt. She watched him with attentive eyes as he made his slow, laborious journey across the parking lot. There was something in his determination that stirred memories she usually kept carefully tucked away. "Hello there," she said softly as Tilt approached her stand. The cat paused, regarding her with a steady gaze before settling down in a patch of shade near her feet. He didn't come close enough for her to touch him, maintaining a cautious distance. Darlene reached into a small paper bag beside her stool and withdrew a piece of cooked chicken she had brought from home. She placed it on the ground, sliding it toward Tilt with gentle fingers. "You must be hungry after your long walk," she murmured. Tilt watched her for a long moment, unmoving. Then, with slow deliberation, he rose and took the offering, his movements careful and precise despite his awkward gait. He didn't eat it immediately, but carried it in his mouth as he departed, heading toward the side of the building. Darlene watched him go, noting how he paused beside an old bench before disappearing around the corner of the market. There was something about the way he stopped, so intentional, almost reverent, that piqued her curiosity. Later that afternoon, when the lunch rush had passed and the flower stand was quiet, Darlene closed up early and walked over to the bench. It was an old wooden one, the kind that had been common in parks decades ago. A small plaque was affixed to the backrest, its brass surface dulled with age. Darlene leaned closer to read the faded engraving, "In memory of Agatha S." "Excuse me," she called to a young woman in a Ruther's Market apron who was collecting shopping carts. "Do you know who Agatha S. was?" The employee pushed a strand of hair from her face. "Oh, that was Ms. Steinberg. She used to sit there every day feeding the strays. Store manager tried to make her stop, said it was attracting too many cats, but she'd been shopping here since the place opened, so they let her be. She passed away last winter, peaceful-like in her sleep." "I see," Darlene said, running her fingers over the cool metal of the plaque. "Thank you." As she walked back to her flower stand, she thought of Tilt stopping at the bench each day. Was he one of Agatha's strays? Did he still come looking for her, not understanding where she had gone? The notion tugged at Darlene's heart in a way she hadn't felt for years, not since David, her grandson, had left this world far too early. Both she and the cat seemed to be carrying losses that no one else could see. That night, as rain began to patter against her kitchen window, Darlene found herself wondering where Tilt sought shelter. The forecast had predicted storms for the next few days. Would he find somewhere dry to wait it out? She stood at her window, watching the raindrops trace silvery paths down the glass, and made a silent promise to look for him when the weather cleared. There was something about his struggle that spoke to her, something in his silent determination that echoed the memories she carried of her grandson's brave fight. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing away footprints in the soil and obscuring the paths that led through town. Somewhere in the darkness, a grey cat with a tilted walk made his way through the storm, carrying more than just his physical burden. What secrets did he hold? And why did his daily pilgrimage to the flower stand and Agatha's bench matter so much that he would brave ridicule and pain to complete it? Darlene couldn't explain the connection she felt to this stray, but as the rain drummed on her roof, she knew that something had shifted in her quiet life, and that Tilt's crooked path had somehow intersected with her own. For 3 days, the rain fell in sheets across Millfield. It pooled in the dips of the Ruthers Market parking lot and drummed against the canvas awning of Darlene's flower stand. She arrived each morning, setting out her buckets of flowers despite the weather. The rain kept most customers away, leaving her with long hours of solitude broken only by the occasional dash of a shopper from car to store entrance. Each day she looked for Tilt. Each day the parking lot remained empty of his grey, swaying form. "Seems like even Tilt has more sense than to be out in this weather," remarked Judy, a cashier who sometimes bought daisies from Darlene on payday. Darlene nodded, but worry had settled in her chest like a stone. Strange, she thought, to be so concerned about a stray cat she barely knew. Yet the worry remained, growing heavier with each rainy day that passed without a glimpse of him. On the 4th morning, the clouds finally parted, allowing weak sunlight to dapple the wet pavement. Darlene arrived early, her eyes scanning the parking lot with more eagerness than she cared to admit. The hours ticked by slowly. 10 o'clock came and went, then 10:15. At 10:30, when Darlene had nearly given up hope, she spotted him. Tilt appeared from his usual direction, but his condition made her breath catch. His grey fur was matted and sodden, clinging to a frame that seemed even thinner than before. His usual wobbling gait was even more pronounced, each step appearing to require tremendous effort. "Oh, you poor thing," Darlene whispered. Despite his condition, Tilt maintained his dignity. He made his way across the lot, ignoring the puddles that soaked his paws. A couple of teenagers by the entrance pointed and snickered at his labored progress, but he paid them no mind. When he reached the flower stand, Darlene had already prepared a larger portion of chicken than usual. She placed it on a small paper plate and set it down. "You must be starving," she said gently. To her surprise, Tilt did not take the food in his mouth as he usually did. Instead, he settled awkwardly beside the plate and ate there, his golden eyes occasionally glancing up at Darlene, as if to ensure she wouldn't reclaim the offering. When he finished, he remained seated, his tail curled neatly around his paws. "It's good to see you," Darlene told him, resisting the urge to reach out and stroke his wet fur. She had learned long ago that strays needed to make the first move. Trust was a fragile thing, easily broken. After a few minutes of shared silence, Tilt rose and made his way to Agatha's bench. He paused there, as always, then continued onward. But Darlene noticed something different this time. He carried nothing in his mouth, no food for later, no scraps carefully collected from around the trash bins. It was as if the effort of his journey had consumed all his strength, leaving none for his usual gathering. That night, as Darlene prepared her simple dinner of soup and toast, she found herself unable to shake thoughts of Tilt from her mind. Where did he go when he left the market? Did he have shelter somewhere? And, most puzzling of all, why did he make the difficult journey to the flower stand each day, despite his obvious pain? "This is ridiculous," she told herself as she washed her single bowl and spoon. "He's just a stray cat. The town is full of them." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they weren't true. Tilt wasn't just any stray. There was purpose in his daily routine, a mysterious determination that went beyond mere survival. Darlene glanced at the clock. It was nearly 8 in the evening, later than she usually ventured out, but the nagging worry wouldn't leave her. With a sigh, she reached for her raincoat and a small flashlight she kept for power outages. "I must be going senile," she muttered as she locked her front door behind her. But her steps were purposeful as she headed toward Ruthers Market, hoping to catch sight of Tilt making his evening rounds. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, just a few cars belonging to the night shift employees. The flower stand stood dark and quiet. Darlene walked to Agatha's bench and sat down. wondering if she would see Tilt padding across the lot in the twilight. An hour passed with no sign of the grey cat. Discouraged but still determined, Darlene decided to walk around the neighborhood. If Tilt came to the market every day, his home couldn't be too far away. She had covered about 2 blocks when movement caught her eye. A familiar swaying gait, a grey form slipping between houses. Keeping a respectful distance, she followed. Tilt moved steadily, seeming to know exactly where he was going despite the growing darkness. After another block, he turned down an alley behind what had once been the town's hardware store before the big box retailers had forced it out of business. The building had stood empty for years, its windows boarded up, its once bright sign faded to ghostly letters. Tilt approached a sagging chain-link fence that surrounded the property. With surprising agility for a cat in his condition, he squeezed through a gap near the bottom and disappeared from view. Darlene hesitated at the fence line. She was trespassing now, and at her age, scaling fences wasn't an advisable activity. But the thought of Tilt, wet and hungry in some cold corner of the abandoned building, spurred her on. She found the gap he had used, and after some awkward maneuvering that would have mortified her had anyone been watching, managed to slip through. The back of the hardware store was littered with debris, old wooden pallets, rusted metal shelving, plastic bags caught in the overgrown weeds. In the beam of her flashlight, Darlene could make out pawprints in the mud, leading toward a small shed at the edge of the property. The shed door hung askew on one hinge, creaking softly in the evening breeze. Darlene approached cautiously, aware that she might be disturbing more than just Tilt in this forgotten place. "Hello?" she called softly. "Tilt? Are you in there?" No response came, but as she shone her flashlight through the doorway, she caught the gleam of eyes reflecting back at her, Tilt's golden gaze, watching her warily from the corner of the shed. "It's all right," she said, keeping her voice low and gentle. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." She took a step inside, then stopped abruptly as a sound reached her ears, a soft, high-pitched mewling, almost too faint to hear. Her flashlight beam swept the floor of the shed, landing finally on a cardboard box tucked against the wall. Tilt was curled beside it, his body positioned as if to shield the box from view. But as Darlene moved closer, he shifted slightly, and the light fell on the contents of the box. A tiny kitten, its fur midnight black against the cardboard, lifted its head at the sound of her approach. Its eyes, when they caught the light, were cloudy and unseeing, completely blind. "Oh," Darlene breathed, understanding flooding through her. "Oh, Tilt." The grey cat watched her, his posture alert but not threatening. There was an intelligence in his gaze that seemed to assess her intentions, weighing her presence against the vulnerability of the kitten in the box. The kitten mewed again, a plaintive sound that stirred something deep in Darlene's heart. She knelt slowly, mindful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten either cat. "Is this why you come to the market every day?" she asked Tilt softly. "To find food for both of you?" As if in answer, Tilt moved closer to the box, curling his body protectively around the edge. The kitten, sensing his presence, turned its blind face toward him and mewled again. Outside, a distant rumble of thunder warned of more rain to come. Darlene looked around the dilapidated shed, noting the places where water had already seeped through the roof. This was no place for an injured cat and a blind kitten to weather another storm. "You can't stay here," she said firmly. "Both of you. You need somewhere dry and warm." Tilt regarded her steadily, his golden eyes unblinking. In that moment, Darlene felt as if some unspoken communication passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose, of understanding that transcended the barriers of species. With gentle hands, she reached for the cardboard box. The kitten inside startled at her touch, but didn't try to flee, perhaps too weak or simply trusting in Tilt's judgment of this strange human. "I'm going to help you," Darlene promised, her voice cracking slightly. "Both of you." As she lifted the box, Tilt rose to his feet, his strange, tilted gait somehow less pronounced in the familiar environment of the shed. He watched her intently, his entire body alert. "Will you come with us?" Darlene asked him. "I promise I'll bring you back tomorrow if that's what you want. But tonight, at least, let me give you shelter." For a long moment, Tilt remained motionless. Then, with deliberate steps, he moved toward the shed door, pausing to look back at her as if to say, "Are you coming?" Darlene followed, the cardboard box held carefully in her arms, the kitten's tiny form warm against her hands through the worn cardboard. As they emerged from the shed, the first heavy raindrops began to fall, spattering the ground around them. "Let's hurry," she told Tilt, quickening her pace. To her amazement, the grey cat stayed with her, matching his painful stride to hers as they made their way back through the gap in the fence and onto the sidewalk. Together, the unlikely trio headed toward Darlene's house, while behind them, the rain washed away their footprints, erasing the path back to the lonely shed. What would morning bring? Would Tilt stay, or would he insist on returning to his familiar routine? And what would she do with a blind kitten that clearly depended on him? As these questions swirled in her mind, Darlene felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose that went beyond her daily routine of flowers and solitude. Darlene's cottage stood at the end of Maple Street, a modest white-clapboard house with blue shutters and a small front porch lined with potted geraniums. It had been her home for 43 years, ever since she and Harold had bought it as newlyweds. Now, with Harold 15 years in his grave and their only daughter living 3 states away, the cottage sometimes felt too quiet, too empty of life. But not tonight. "Here we are," she said to Tilt as she climbed the 3 steps to her porch, the cardboard box balanced carefully in her arms. The grey cat had followed her all the way from the abandoned hardware store, his uneven gait never faltering despite the distance. Now he paused at the bottom of the steps, regarding the house with what Darlene could only interpret as caution. "It's all right," she assured him. "You're welcome here." She unlocked the door and stepped inside, setting the box gently on the kitchen table. The black kitten inside mewed softly, perhaps disturbed by the sudden warmth after so long in the damp shed. Darlene turned back to the open door. Tilt remained on the walkway, seemingly hesitant to cross the threshold. "The door's open for you," she told him. "I won't force you to come in, but there's food and warmth if you want it." With that, she busied herself with the kitten, giving Tilt space to make his own decision. She found an old towel in the linen closet and lined a shallow basket with it, creating a softer bed than the sodden cardboard. With gentle hands, she lifted the kitten into its new nest. In the light of her kitchen, she could see how truly tiny it was, no more than a few weeks old, with ribs visible beneath the black fur. Its eyes, clouded with blindness, blinked rapidly in the unfamiliar brightness. "You need a name, little one," Darlene murmured, stroking the kitten's head with one finger. "What shall we call you?" A soft thud from the doorway made her look up. Tilt had entered the house. He stood just inside the door, his golden eyes taking in every detail of the kitchen. His fur was still damp from the rain, and he looked even more bedraggled in the bright interior light. "Welcome," Darlene said quietly. "Let me get you something to eat." She moved slowly around the kitchen, conscious of Tilt watching her every move. From the refrigerator, she took out leftover chicken and some milk. She shredded the chicken into tiny pieces for the kitten and put the rest in a bowl for Tilt. The milk she warmed slightly before pouring a small amount into a shallow dish. "This is for the little one," she explained, as she placed the milk and some of the shredded chicken near the basket. "And this is for you." She set Tilt's bowl on the floor near the door, giving him the space he seemed to need. To her surprise, Tilt didn't immediately approach his food. Instead, he made his way with that characteristic swaying gait to the basket. He sniffed the kitten thoroughly, then gently nudged it with his nose, as if checking that it was unharmed. Only when the kitten began to eat the offered food did Tilt turn his attention to his own meal. Even then, he seemed to eat hastily, his eyes frequently returning to the basket. "You've been looking after this little one all by yourself, haven't you?" Darlene asked, understanding dawning. "That's why you make that difficult walk to the market every day. Not for yourself, but for the kitten." Tilt's golden eyes met hers briefly, before returning to his food. There was an intelligence in that gaze that made Darlene wonder just how much he understood. After they had eaten, Darlene filled a shallow pan with warm water and placed it on the floor. "You could use a cleaning up," she told Tilt. "But I won't force that on you either." She busied herself with washing the dishes, giving the cat time to decide about the bath. From the corner of her eye, she saw him approach the water cautiously, sniff it, then begin to drink. After his thirst was satisfied, he surprised her by stepping into the pan and allowing the warm water to soak his muddy paws and legs. "Well, look at that," Darlene said with a smile. "You're a gentleman after all." Later, with both cats fed and settled, Darlene sat in her armchair by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. Tilt had curled up in the basket beside the kitten, his larger body curved protectively around the tiny form. The kitten slept soundly, its sides rising and falling in the deep, trusting sleep of the very young. Darlene found her thoughts turning to David, her grandson. He would have been 14 this year, old enough to be interested in girls and sports and whatever else teenage boys concerned themselves with these days. Instead, he had never seen his 6th birthday, his small body too fragile to withstand the illness that had claimed him. She remembered the last time she had seen him, propped up in his hospital bed, his skin nearly translucent, his once bright eyes dulled with pain and medication. Yet he had smiled for her, had asked her to tell him stories about the flowers in her shop. "Grammy," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper, "when I get better, can I come work in your flower shop? I want to help people find the right flowers to make them happy." "Of course you can," she had promised, holding his thin hand in hers, knowing even then that it was a promise she would never be able to keep. A soft sound from the basket drew her back to the present. The kitten was mewing in its sleep, tiny paws kneading the air as if dreaming of milk. Tilt immediately raised his head, alert to the kitten's distress. He began to groom the little one with gentle strokes of his tongue, the rumble of his purr audible even from where Darlene sat. The simple act of care brought unexpected tears to her eyes. How many nights had Tilt sat like this in that cold, damp shed, offering the only comfort he could to a blind kitten that depended entirely upon him? How had he managed, with his own injuries making every step painful, to find enough food for both of them? "You're quite remarkable," she told the grey cat. "Do you know that?" Tilt looked up at her words, his golden eyes reflecting the lamplight. Then he returned to his grooming, his attention focused entirely on his charge. Darlene wiped away her tears and rose from her chair. "It's getting late," she said. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." She prepared for bed with her usual routine, but as she laid her head on the pillow, she found her thoughts still circling around her unexpected guests. What would she do with them? The kitten clearly needed veterinary care, and Tilt himself looked as if he could use a thorough examination. But would he allow himself to be taken to a vet? Would he even stay until morning? These questions followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of David running through a field of flowers, a grey cat with a tilted walk following at his heels, both of them whole and healthy and free from pain. She woke to unfamiliar sounds, a soft thud, the patter of paws on hardwood, a mewing that started quietly but grew more insistent. For a moment, disoriented from her dream, she thought it was David calling for her. Then reality settled in, and she remembered her visitors. The bedside clock showed 6:17 a.m., earlier than she usually rose, but with the first pale light of dawn already filtering through her curtains. She put on her robe and slippers and made her way to the kitchen. The basket on the table was empty. For a heart-stopping moment, Darlene feared that Tilt had taken the kitten and left during the night. Then she spotted them near the back door, Tilt sitting patiently, the kitten beside him, both seemingly waiting. "Good morning," she said. "Are you wanting to go outside already?" Tilt meowed, the first vocal sound she had heard from him, and stood up, making his way to the door with his characteristic swaying gait. "I see," Darlene said, understanding his intention. "You want to go back. But what about the little one?" As if in answer, Tilt returned to the kitten and gently nudged it toward the basket, then looked up at Darlene expectantly. "You want me to keep the kitten here while you go back to your routine?" she guessed. Tilt meowed again, more insistently this time. "All right," Darlene agreed, though the thought of him returning to his difficult daily journey troubled her. "But I wish you would stay too." She opened the back door and Tilt slipped out into the early morning light. From her doorway, Darlene watched him make his way down her garden path, his strange walk somehow seeming less pronounced than it had the day before. Perhaps a night of warmth and good food had eased some of his pain. At the garden gate, he paused and looked back, as if making sure the kitten was indeed safe with her. Then he continued on his way, disappearing around the corner of the neighbor's hedge. Darlene closed the door with a sigh and turned her attention to the kitten, which was now mewing more urgently, probably hungry after its night's sleep. "Well, little one," she said, lifting the kitten gently into her hands, "it seems it's just you and me for now. Let's get you some breakfast, and then I think we need to pay a visit to Dr. Peterson." As she prepared food for the kitten, Darlene found herself wondering where Tilt was headed. Would he return to the abandoned shed? Or was there somewhere else he needed to be? And would he come back to check on the kitten and on her? The day stretched ahead, full of questions and possibilities. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Darlene felt a spark of anticipation. Whatever happened next, her quiet routine had been disrupted in the most unexpected way by a grey cat with a tilted walk and the silent burden he carried. Dr. Peterson's veterinary clinic occupied a converted Victorian house on Pine Street, its wraparound porch now serving as a waiting area for patients and their owners. The bell above the door jingled cheerfully as Darlene entered, the black kitten secure in a small pet carrier she had borrowed from her neighbour. "Darlene Ellis, is that you with a pet?" Marge Peterson emerged from an examination room, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her smile warm and familiar. She had been Millfield's veterinarian for over 30 years and had known Darlene since their children attended the same elementary school. "It's not exactly mine," Darlene explained, setting the carrier on the reception counter. "I found it last night, or rather, another cat led me to it." She recounted the story of Tilt and his daily journey to the market, the discovery of the kitten in the abandoned shed, and Tilt's departure that morning. Marge listened with growing interest. "So this Tilt fellow has been caring for a blind kitten all on his own. That's quite remarkable." She peered into the carrier at the tiny black kitten. "Let's have a look at this little patient, shall we?" In the examination room, Marge gently lifted the kitten onto the metal table. Her experienced hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking ears, teeth, and paws. "It's a female," she announced. "About 4 weeks old, I'd say, and yes, completely blind, congenital most likely. She's underweight but not severely malnourished, which is a testament to how well this Tilt has been caring for her." "Will she be all right?" Darlene asked, surprising herself with how much she cared about the answer. Marge nodded. "With proper care, blind cats can lead perfectly happy lives. They compensate remarkably well with their other senses." She administered a few vaccines and wrote out instructions for feeding and care. "What are you planning to do with her?" I hadn't really thought that far ahead," Darlene admitted. "I suppose I was hoping Tilt would come back, and we could figure it out together." Marge's eyes softened with understanding. "You know, we haven't seen you take an interest in much of anything since David passed. It's good to see you caring about something again." Darlene looked away, uncomfortable with the observation. "It's just a stray kitten. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have," Marge said gently. "Most people would have called animal control and gone about their business. You took her home and you're here now, making sure she gets proper care." She stroked the kitten's soft fur. "Have you thought of a name for her?" Darlene hesitated, then said, "I was thinking of calling her Fennel." "Fennel? That's unusual." It was one of David's favorite words. He loved the sound of it, used to say it over and over, just to hear the way the syllables felt in his mouth. Darlene smiled at the memory. "And it seems right somehow, for a kitten who's been cared for by a cat named after a lean." "Fennel it is then," Marge said, filling out a patient card. "And what about Tilt? If he comes back, you should bring him in. I'd like to have a look at whatever's causing that unusual gait." "If he comes back," Darlene echoed, realizing how much she hoped he would. With Fennel safely back in the carrier and a supply of special kitten formula in her bag, Darlene headed to her flower stand. It was nearly 10 o'clock and she didn't want to miss Tilt if he made his usual appearance at the market. The morning was bright and clear after the rain, the air freshened by the storm. Darlene set up her flowers with practiced efficiency, then placed the carrier in a shady spot behind her stool. Fennel had fallen asleep during the walk from the vet's office, her tiny body curled into a tight ball of black fur. "Excuse me, are those daisies fresh?" A customer approached, a middle-aged woman with a harried expression. Darlene slipped back into her usual role, discussing flower choices and arranging a small bouquet. But all the while, her eyes kept straying to the parking lot, watching for a familiar grey form with a swaying gait. 10:30 came and went, then 11. By noon, Darlene's hope had begun to fade. Perhaps Tilt had decided not to return to his old routine, now that Fennel was safe. Perhaps he had found another stray to care for, or maybe, a thought that brought an unexpected pang, he had been injured or worse on his morning journey. "You looking for Tilt?" Darlene turned to find Rick, the bag boy who had often mocked Tilt's walk, standing beside her flower stand. His usual smirk was absent, replaced by what appeared to be genuine concern. "Yes. Have you seen him today?" she asked, surprised by his interest. Rick shook his head. "Not since before the rain, but listen, Miss Ellis. I heard you took in a kitten that Tilt was looking after. Is that true?" Darlene indicated the carrier. "Her name is Fennel. She's blind." Rick peered at the sleeping kitten with unexpected gentleness. "So that's why he was always gathering food, not for himself, but for her." He straightened up, a flush of shame coloring his cheeks. "We all thought he was just a weird stray, you know? The way he walked, it looked almost comical. We didn't know." "We rarely do," Darlene said, not unkindly. "Most of the time, we see only what's on the surface." Rick nodded, seemingly lost in thought. Then he said, "If Tilt shows up, will you let me know? I'd like to, well, make it up to him somehow." "I will," Darlene promised, finding herself warming to this young man she had previously thought rather thoughtless. The afternoon stretched on. Customers came and went, and still there was no sign of Tilt. By 4 o'clock, when Darlene usually began packing up her stand, she had resigned herself to the possibility that she might not see him again. She was wrapping the last bucket of unsold carnations when a voice called out to her, "Ms. Ellis, there's someone here looking for you." It was Judy, the cashier, leading an elderly man toward the flower stand. He walked with the aid of a cane, his back slightly stooped with age, but his eyes were bright and alert behind wire-rimmed glasses. "This is Dr. Wilson," Judy explained. "He's retired now, but he used to be the vet here before Dr. Peterson. He heard about Tilt and wanted to talk to you." "George Wilson," the old man said, extending a gnarled hand. "Marge called me this afternoon. Said you'd found something interesting. A disabled cat caring for a blind kitten. Thought I might be able to help." Darlene shook his hand, puzzled. "It's nice to meet you, Dr. Wilson, but I'm not sure how you can help. Tilt hasn't come back." "Ah, but I think I might know why," Dr. Wilson said, "and where you might find him. You see, that description Marge gave me, grey cat, unusual gait, very intelligent, it sounded familiar. About 3 years ago, I treated a cat fitting that description. He'd been hit by a car and had severe injuries to his spine and pelvis," Dr. Wilson continued, settling onto the stool Darlene offered. "The owner wanted to put him down, said a cat that couldn't walk properly wasn't worth the expense of surgery." Darlene felt a surge of indignation. "That's terrible." "Indeed, Doctor," Wilson agreed, his weathered face creasing with old anger. "I refused, of course, told the fellow I'd take the cat myself if he didn't want him. That's when he just left, walked out and never came back. Abandoned the poor creature right there on my table." "And that was Tilt?" Darlene asked, her heart aching at the thought of such callous treatment. "I believe so. I performed the surgery anyway, set the bones as best I could, though I knew he'd always have that distinctive gait. He was a fighter, that one. Recovered faster than I expected." The old vet smiled at the memory. "I was planning to adopt him myself, but he had other ideas. The day I was going to take him home, he escaped from his cage, just vanished." "He's been living on the streets all this time," Darlene murmured, thinking of the daily struggle it must have been for Tilt, navigating the world with his permanent injuries. Dr. Wilson nodded. "From what Marge told me, he's been doing more than just surviving. He's been caring for another creature even more vulnerable than himself." He glanced at the carrier where Fennel was now awake, her tiny pink mouth opening in a silent meow. "May I?" Darlene nodded, and Dr. Wilson carefully lifted Fennel from the carrier, his experienced hands gentle as he examined her. "Perfect little thing, isn't she?" he said softly. "Apart from the blindness, of course. But that won't stop her from having a good life, especially with the start she's had, being cared for by a cat who knows what it means to overcome disability." He handed Fennel back to Darlene. "As for where you might find Tilt, have you checked Agatha Steinberg's old place? She lived in that little yellow house on Elm Street. If Tilt is the cat I remember, and if he was one of Agatha's strays, he might have gone back there. But Agatha passed away months ago," Darlene said, remembering what the store employee had told her about the memorial bench. "Yes, but cats don't understand death the way we do. They know absence and they know places of safety. If Agatha's house was once a safe place for him..." Darlene didn't need to hear more. "Thank you, Dr. Wilson. I'll go there right away." With Fennel secured in her carrier and her flower stand hastily packed up, Darlene headed toward Elm Street. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the quiet residential street. Agatha Steinberg's house was easy to spot. A small yellow cottage with white trim, surrounded by a garden that had once been carefully tended, but was now growing wild in its owner's absence. A for sale sign stood in the front yard, weather-beaten and leaning slightly to one side. The property had clearly been on the market for some time without finding a buyer. Darlene approached the gate tentatively, feeling like an intruder, but concern for Tilt overrode her hesitation. She pushed open the gate, which creaked in protest, and made her way up the overgrown path to the front porch. "Tilt," she called softly. "Are you here?" No response came, but Darlene noticed that one of the porch boards had been pried loose, creating a small opening barely large enough for a cat to slip through. She knelt beside it, peering into the darkness beneath the porch. "Tilt, it's Darlene. I've brought Fennel with me. She's doing well. The vet says she's going to be fine." A rustling sound came from the darkness, followed by a soft meow. Then, to Darlene's relief, two golden eyes appeared, gleaming in the shadows. "There you are," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I've been worried about you." Tilt emerged slowly from beneath the porch, his grey fur dusty, but his eyes alert. He approached Darlene cautiously, then rubbed against her hand in a gesture of trust that brought tears to her eyes. "I met someone today who remembers you," she told him, gently stroking his fur. "Dr. Wilson. He said you were quite the escape artist." Tilt meowed again, then turned his attention to the carrier. Fennel, sensing his presence, began to mew excitedly, her tiny paws reaching through the bars. "She's missed you," Darlene said, opening the carrier door. Tilt immediately moved closer, sniffing Fennel thoroughly, as if checking that she was unharmed. The kitten batted at his face playfully, her blindness no barrier to recognizing her protector. As Darlene watched their reunion, a thought occurred to her. "You've been coming here every day, haven't you? That's where you went this morning, to check if Agatha had somehow returned." Tilt looked up at her words, his golden eyes seeming to hold a depth of understanding that transcended the barrier between their species. "She's not coming back, Tilt," Darlene said gently. "I'm sorry." As if in response to her words, Tilt moved away from the carrier and padded toward the front door of the cottage. He sat before it, his posture expectant, then looked back at Darlene. "You want to go inside?" she asked, puzzled. Tilt meowed once, firmly. Darlene hesitated. The house was technically for sale, but entering without permission would still be trespassing. On the other hand, if Tilt was trying to show her something important— "All right," she decided. "But just for a moment." She tried the doorknob, expecting it to be locked, but to her surprise it turned easily in her hand. The door swung open with a creak of disused hinges, revealing a small, tidy living room with furniture draped in white sheets, a house waiting for its next chapter. Tilt entered without hesitation, his swaying gait taking him confidently across the room to a hallway beyond. Darlene followed, carrying Fennel in her arms. The hallway led to a small bedroom at the back of the house. Here, too, the furniture was covered, except for a rocking chair by the window. On the chair lay a faded quilt, carefully folded. Tilt jumped onto the chair with surprising agility for a cat with his condition. He turned in a circle, then settled on the quilt, looking up at Darlene as if to say, "This is what I wanted you to see." Darlene approached the chair slowly. As she got closer, she noticed something else, a framed photograph on the bedside table. It showed a much younger Agatha Steinberg standing beside a man in a wheelchair. Both were smiling broadly, their hands clasped together. Was that Agatha's husband? Darlene wondered aloud. As if in answer, she noticed a small plaque on the wall above the bed. It read, "In loving memory of Samuel Steinberg, who taught me that the measure of a life is not in its physical abilities, but in its capacity for love." Understanding dawned on Darlene. Agatha's husband was disabled, she said softly. That's why she had such a heart for strays like you, Tilt. She understood what it meant to see beyond physical limitations. Tilt blinked slowly, then rose from the quilt and returned to Darlene's side. He rubbed against her ankles, then looked toward the door. "You're ready to go?" she asked. "Back to my house?" Tilt meowed once, and Darlene took it as a yes. "I'm glad," she told him. "I was hoping you would stay." As they left Agatha's house, Darlene made sure to close the door securely behind them. The evening was deepening into twilight, the first stars appearing in the eastern sky. "It's a new chapter for all of us," she said to her companions as they made their way back toward Maple Street. "A chance to start again." Tilt walked beside her, his uneven gait somehow less pronounced than before. Perhaps it was just the gathering darkness hiding his disability, or perhaps it was the fact that he no longer had to make his daily journey alone. Whatever the reason, there was a new lightness to his step as he accompanied Darlene and Fennel home. What would their life together be like, Darlene wondered. Could a lonely widow, a disabled cat, and a blind kitten form the kind of family she had thought she would never have again? As these questions filled her mind, she felt a strange sense of rightness, as if the broken pieces of her life were being gathered and reformed into something new and unexpected. Behind them, Agatha Steinberg's yellow house stood silent in the twilight, its windows dark but its presence somehow benevolent, as if approving of the unlikely family making their way home through the gathering night. The next morning, Darlene awoke to the unfamiliar but delightful sensation of a small warm body curled against her neck. Fennel had somehow managed to climb up onto the bed during the night and had nestled herself into the hollow beneath Darlene's chin. Her tiny paws twitched in sleep, perhaps chasing dream mice through imaginary fields. Tilt was nowhere to be seen, and for a moment Darlene worried that he had left again, but then she heard the soft thud of paws on hardwood, and he appeared in the bedroom doorway, his golden eyes regarding her with what she could almost believe was affection. "Good morning to you too," she said, carefully shifting Fennel to the pillow as she sat up. "I see you've made yourself at home." It was strange how quickly her solitary routine had expanded to include these two creatures. She found herself talking to them as she prepared breakfast, explaining what she was doing as if they could understand every word. Perhaps they did in their own way. Tilt certainly seemed to follow her conversations, his eyes tracking her movements, his ears flicking toward her voice. "I need to go to the flower stand today," she told them as she sipped her morning tea, "but I don't want to leave you two alone just yet. Would you like to come with me?" Tilt tilted his head, considering. Then he moved to where Fennel was exploring the kitchen floor, gently nudging her in Darlene's direction. "I'll take that as a yes," Darlene said with a smile. The morning was bright and clear, the air washed clean by the recent rains. Darlene packed her usual supplies for the flower stand, adding a small box lined with a towel for Fennel and some cat treats she had purchased on the way home from the vet's the previous day. "Ready?" she asked her companions. Tilt meowed once, as if answering, and Fennel, perhaps picking up on the excitement in Darlene's voice, began to purr loudly. At Ruther's Market, Darlene set up her stand as usual, arranging buckets of flowers in their familiar pattern. She placed Fennel's box in a shady spot beside her stool and watched as Tilt immediately settled beside it, his body positioned to shield the kitten from the morning sun. The first customers arrived, and Darlene fell into her familiar routine of recommending flowers, creating small bouquets and making pleasant conversation. But today felt different. She found herself smiling more, engaging more fully with each person who approached her stand. "Are those your cats?" asked Mrs. Abernathy, a regular customer who came every Friday for a bouquet of whatever was freshest. "They're my new friends," Darlene replied, surprising herself with the ready acknowledgement of connection. "The little black one is Fennel. She's blind. And the grey one is Tilt. He's been taking care of her all on his own until now." Mrs. Abernathy bent down to get a better look. "Well, isn't that something? I've seen that grey fellow around town, walking like he's had one too many, if you know what I mean. Never would have guessed he was a guardian angel to this little one." "He's taught me a thing or two about not judging by appearances," Darlene admitted. As the morning progressed, more customers noticed the cats. Some, like Mrs. Abernathy, were charmed by the story. Others shared their own tales of remarkable animals they had known. "My Rufus knew when my Frank was going to have his heart attack," said Edith Turner, an elderly woman who rarely bought flowers but often stopped to chat. "Started howling the night before it happened. If I hadn't already been awake when Frank clutched his chest, well—" She shook her head, leaving the rest unsaid. Rick, the bag boy who had previously mocked Tilt's walk, stopped by during his break. He crouched beside the flower stand, a paper bag in his hand. "Brought something for Tilt," he said, not quite meeting Darlene's eyes. "It's chicken. Fresh, not leftover. Figured he deserves something special after all he's been through. Darlene accepted the offering with a smile. That's very thoughtful of you, Rick. The young man shrugged, embarrassed. Least I could do after... He gestured vaguely, indicating his past behavior. Anyway, if you ever need someone to watch them, you know, if you're busy or something, I could help. I'm good with animals. I'll keep that in mind, Darlene promised. As Rick walked away, she noticed something surprising. Tilt was watching him with what appeared to be understanding, perhaps even forgiveness, in his golden eyes. You're a better soul than most humans I know, she told the grey cat, scratching gently behind his ears. Around noon, Judy the cashier emerged from the market, her face alight with excitement. Ms. Ellis, I just heard the most amazing thing about your cat. Which one? Darlene asked, amused by the proprietary way everyone was suddenly referring to Tilt and Fennel as her cats. The grey one, Tilt. Dr. Wilson's been telling everyone about him. Says he's some kind of miracle cat, surviving those injuries and then taking care of a blind kitten all on his own. Judy's eyes were wide with wonder. Is it true he was hit by a car and abandoned by his owner? Darlene nodded. That's what Dr. Wilson believes, yes? And he still trusted you enough to let you help the kitten, after what a human did to him? Judy shook her head in amazement. That's something special, that is. As Judy returned to her checkout, Darlene reflected on her words. It was remarkable when she thought about it. Despite being injured and abandoned by humans, Tilt had somehow maintained his capacity for trust, not blindly, but with careful discernment. He had recognized something in Darlene, some quality that told him she could be trusted with his most precious responsibility. The thought was humbling. It made her wonder what Tilt had seen in her that she herself had forgotten was there. The afternoon brought more customers than usual to the flower stand. Word had spread about the special cats, and people came as much to see them as to buy flowers. Darlene found herself telling the story again and again, how she had followed Tilt to the abandoned shed, found Fennel, discovered the truth about his daily journey to collect food. It's like something out of a storybook, said Margaret Reed, the town librarian. You should write it down, Darlene. Children would love a tale like that. Darlene laughed softly. I'm no writer, Margaret. I'll leave that to the professionals. But the idea lingered in her mind as the day wore on. There was something about Tilt's story that resonated with people, that made them stop and reconsider their assumptions. Perhaps it was worth preserving in some form. As the afternoon began to wane, an unexpected visitor approached the flower stand, Dr. Marge Peterson still in her veterinary scrubs. Thought I'd stop by and see how my patients are doing, she said, bending to examine Fennel, who was now exploring the limited confines of her box with increasing confidence. She looks good, alert, active. You're doing a fine job with her, Darlene. It's not me, Darlene demurred. Tilt's the one who saved her. Marge straightened up and regarded Tilt thoughtfully. Mind if I have a look at him while I'm here? Save you a trip to the clinic. At Darlene's nod, Marge knelt beside Tilt, her hands moving with professional confidence over his body. Tilt submitted to the examination with surprising patience, only flinching slightly when she touched his hind legs. Just as George described, Marge murmured. The pelvis healed at an angle, and there's significant scarring along the lower spine. He must be in some pain, especially on cold or damp days. Is there anything we can do for him? Darlene asked, her heart aching at the thought of Tilt's silent suffering. Marge nodded. I can prescribe an anti-inflammatory that should help. It won't correct the structural issues, but it should make him more comfortable. She stroked Tilt's fur gently. He's quite remarkable, you know. Most animals with this level of injury would become withdrawn, aggressive even, but he's channeled whatever pain he feels into caring for another. He's taught me a thing or two about resilience, Darlene admitted. Marge's eyes softened. I know you understand something about that yourself, Darlene. After David and then Harold, she trailed off, respecting the privacy of Darlene's grief. Yes, Darlene said simply. I suppose I do. As Marge wrote out a prescription for Tilt's medication, she mentioned casually, by the way, the whole town's talking about him. Rick from the market has apparently been telling anyone who'll listen about how Tilt forgave him, and Mrs. Abernathy stopped by the clinic to ask if there was a fund for his care, said she'd like to contribute. Darlene blinked in surprise. A fund? But that's not necessary, I can manage. I know you can, Marge said, handing her the prescription. But people want to help. They're inspired by his story. It's touched something in them. After Marge left, Darlene sat quietly, watching as Tilt gently bathed Fennel with his rough tongue, the kitten purring loudly enough for her to hear from her stool. How strange, she thought, that this broken, abandoned creature had become a source of inspiration to so many. In his silent determination to care for another despite his own limitations, he had reminded the people of Millfield of something important, something they perhaps hadn't even realized they had forgotten. As the day drew to a close and Darlene began packing up her flower stand, she noticed something unusual. A small bouquet of wildflowers tied with twine had been placed beside Tilt's water dish. There was no note, no indication of who had left it, but the gesture spoke volumes. "Looks like you have an admirer," she told Tilt as she gathered the last of her supplies. The grey cat merely blinked at her, then carefully picked up Fennel by the scruff of her neck and placed her in the carrier Darlene had brought. It was as if he was saying, "We're ready to go home now." Home. The word resonated in Darlene's mind as they made their way back to her cottage on Maple Street. Just days ago, her house had been simply a place where she lived, quiet, orderly, and empty of all but memories. Now, with the addition of two small creatures, it had become something more. It had become home again. As twilight settled over Millfield, Darlene sat on her porch swing, watching as Tilt guided Fennel through the gentle exploration of her small front garden. The kitten's blindness seemed less of a handicap with each passing hour, as she learned to navigate by sound, scent, and the reassuring presence of her guardian. What would tomorrow bring, Darlene wondered? More visitors to the flower stand, curious to see the remarkable cat and his charge. More stories shared, more connections made. The possibilities stretched before her like an opening bloom, full of unexpected color and fragrance. For the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to the morning with genuine anticipation. Life had given her an unexpected gift in the form of two broken, beautiful creatures who had somehow made her own broken places feel less jagged, less empty. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Darlene called softly to her companions. "Time to come in. Tomorrow's another day." Tilt looked up at her words, his golden eyes reflecting the porch light. Then, with gentle nudges, he guided Fennel back toward the house, his tilted walk somehow more graceful in the gathering darkness. They followed Darlene inside, two shadows moving in perfect harmony, their presence filling the cottage with a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. And as she closed the door behind them, Darlene felt something she had thought long lost, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be, with exactly who she was meant to be with. It was a feeling like coming home after a long, lonely journey, a feeling like finding, at last, the right place to plant roots and bloom. Darlene awoke the next morning to the sound of her telephone ringing. She fumbled for the receiver, still half asleep, Fennel curled in a tight ball beside her pillow. "Hello?" she murmured, glancing at the bedside clock. 7:15, earlier than anyone usually called. "Darlene? It's Margaret Reed from the library. Have you seen the paper this morning?" Darlene sat up, immediately alert. "No, why?" "Your cat's on the front page. Well, a story about him anyway. Someone must have talked to the editor. It's quite a write-up." After promising Margaret she would check the paper right away, Darlene hung up and hurried to her front door. Sure enough, the Millfield Gazette lay on her porch, and there on the front page was a headline that made her catch her breath. "The Heroic Limper, Local Stray's Extraordinary Journey of Love and Sacrifice." Beneath the headline was a photograph she hadn't known was taken, Tilt sitting beside Fennel's box at the flower stand, his golden eyes alert, his posture protective. The article, written by Emma Parker, the Gazette's longtime features editor, told the story of Tilt's daily journey to find food for Fennel, his own injury and abandonment, and his eventual trust in Darlene. In a world that often seems dominated by selfishness and indifference, the article concluded, this remarkable feline reminds us of what truly matters: courage, sacrifice, and unconditional love. Tilt may walk with a limp, but he stands taller in spirit than many who walk on two legs. "Oh my," Darlene breathed, scanning the article again. "Tilt, you're famous." The grey cat, who had followed her to the door, merely blinked at her words, then turned and padded back to the kitchen where his breakfast awaited. By the time Darlene arrived at her flower stand, it was clear that the article had struck a chord with the people of Millfield. A steady stream of visitors approached throughout the morning, some to buy flowers, but many simply to see Tilt and Fennel for themselves. "My grandson has cerebral palsy," confided an elderly woman who introduced herself as Clara Bennett. "He gets teased sometimes for the way he walks. I'm going to cut out this article and show it to him. Let him know that it's not how you move that matters, but why you keep moving." Others brought small gifts, cat treats, toys for Fennel, even a handmade cushion for Tilt from Mrs. Wilson, the retired veterinarian's wife. "George told me about his spine," she explained. "Thought this might make sitting more comfortable for him." Darlene accepted each offering with growing amazement. She had lived in Millfield all her life, had run the flower stand for decades, yet had never experienced this kind of community connection. It was as if Tilt had opened a door not just to her heart, but to the hearts of everyone around her. Around midday, a sleek black car pulled into the parking lot, and a woman in a tailored suit emerged. She approached the flower stand with purpose, a professional camera hanging from her shoulder. "Ms. Ellis, I'm Rebecca Thornton from the Sterling Tribune." She held out a business card. "Our editor saw the piece in your local paper and thought our readers might be interested in Tilt's story as well. Would you mind if I took some photographs and asked you a few questions?" Darlene hesitated, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. I suppose that would be all right. But it's really Tilt's story, not mine." Rebecca smiled. "That's exactly why it's compelling." "May I?" She gestured toward Tilt, who was watching the proceedings with his usual calm attention. With Darlene's permission, Rebecca spent the next hour photographing Tilt and Fennel, asking questions about their routine, their personalities, the details of how Darlene had discovered them. She was particularly interested in Dr. Wilson's part of the story, the abandoned surgery, Tilt's remarkable recovery, his escape. "People respond to stories of resilience," she explained as she packed up her camera, "especially when they involve the innocent, children, animals. And when there's an element of selflessness, like Tilt caring for Fennel despite his own pain." She shook her head admiringly. "It's the kind of story that reminds people of their better nature." After Rebecca left, promising that the article would appear in Sunday's edition of the Tribune, Darlene found herself pondering the reporter's words. Was that why Tilt's story had resonated so deeply with the people of Millfield? Because it reminded them of the capacity for goodness that existed in all beings, even those who had been broken and abandoned. The afternoon brought more visitors, including several children who had convinced their parents to bring them to see the hero cat they had read about in the paper. Darlene watched with amusement as Tilt patiently endured their attention, allowing them to stroke his fur and peer at Fennel with wide-eyed wonder. "He doesn't walk funny like the paper said," complained one little boy, clearly disappointed. "He's resting now," Darlene explained gently. "When he walks, you can see that his back legs don't work quite right, but that doesn't stop him from doing what needs to be done." "Like a superhero," the boy decided, his disappointment transforming into admiration. "Like Batman, who doesn't have powers but still fights bad guys." "Something like that," Darlene agreed, smiling. As the day drew to a close, Rick approached the flower stand, his shift at the market apparently finished. He had been stopping by regularly, bringing treats for Tilt and playing gently with Fennel during his breaks. "Miss Ellis," he said, shifting from foot to foot, "I was wondering if maybe you could use some help with Tilt and Fennel. Like, if you need to go somewhere and can't take them, or if they need something while you're at the flower stand." Darlene regarded him thoughtfully. The young man who had once mocked Tilt's disability now seemed genuinely invested in the cat's well-being. It was a transformation as remarkable as any in this unfolding story. "Actually, Rick, there is something you could help with," she said. "Dr. Peterson prescribed some medication for Tilt's pain, but I haven't had time to pick it up from the clinic. Would you mind?" Rick's face lit up with the importance of the mission. "I'll go right now. They close at 6, right? I can bring it to your house after." "That would be wonderful, thank you." As Rick hurried off, Darlene began packing up her flower stand for the day. It had been a busier Saturday than usual, with many customers buying flowers almost as an afterthought to visiting Tilt and Fennel. She found herself wondering, with some amusement, if she should rename her business the Hero Cat Flower Stand. The walk home was slow, with Tilt setting a deliberate pace and Darlene carrying Fennel in her arms. The kitten had grown more adventurous with each passing day, but she still tired easily, her small body requiring frequent rest. As they approached Darlene's cottage, she was surprised to see a familiar figure sitting on her porch steps, Emma Parker from the Gazette, notepad in hand. "Miss Ellis," Emma called, rising to greet them, "I hope you don't mind my stopping by. The response to this morning's article has been overwhelming. We've had calls all day, people wanting to know how they can help if there's a fund for Tilt's medical care, whether you're planning to keep both cats permanently." Darlene blinked, momentarily speechless. "All that from one article?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "People are inspired by Tilt's story. It's touched something in them." She glanced down at her notes. "The owner of Pet Paradise called to offer a lifetime supply of premium cat food. The elementary school principal wants to know if you'd bring Tilt in to meet the children. Says it would be a perfect opportunity to teach them about empathy and overcoming challenges." I don't know what to say," Darlene admitted, overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "You don't have to decide anything right now," Emma assured her, "but I was hoping to do a follow-up piece for next week's paper. People want to know what's next for Tilt and Fennel." After Emma left, promising to call in a few days to schedule a proper interview, Darlene sat on her porch swing, trying to process the day's events. Tilt settled beside her, his warmth against her leg a comforting presence. Fennel had fallen asleep in her lap, tiny paws twitching in dreams. "What do you think of all this?" she asked Tilt. "How you've become quite the celebrity." The grey cat merely blinked at her, his expression inscrutable. But Darlene thought she could detect a certain smugness in the way he held his head, as if to say, "Of course people are inspired by me. I'm exceptional." She laughed softly. "Well, you are that," she conceded, scratching behind his ears. "Exceptional indeed." As twilight deepened into evening, Rick arrived with Tilt's medication along with a small gift, a red collar with a shiny bell. "For Fennel," he explained, "so Tilt can hear where she is, even if he can't see her. And she'll get used to the sound, know it's part of her." Darlene accepted the thoughtful gift with genuine appreciation. "That's very clever, Rick. Thank you." After Rick left, promising to stop by the flower stand again on Monday, Darlene prepared dinner for herself and her feline companions. As she moved around the kitchen, she found herself humming softly, a habit she had lost somewhere in the long, quiet years after Harold's death and David's passing. The telephone rang again as she was washing the dishes. It was her daughter, Catherine, calling from her home 3 states away. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you'd adopted cats?" Catherine's voice held a note of amused accusation. "I had to hear about it from Mrs. Abernathy's daughter. She sent me a link to the Gazette's website." Darlene smiled at the familiar voice. "It all happened rather suddenly, and they're not exactly adopted. More like we found each other. Well, the whole town's talking about them, apparently. And about you." Catherine's tone softened. "Mrs. Abernathy's daughter said you seem happier than you've been in years." "Do I?" Darlene glanced down at Tilt, who was supervising her dishwashing with attentive golden eyes. "I suppose I am. I'm glad, Mom. After Dad, and then David." Catherine's voice caught slightly. "I've worried about you being alone there." "I'm not alone anymore," Darlene said simply. After promising to send photographs of Tilt and Fennel, Darlene hung up and finished the dishes. The cottage felt different tonight, fuller somehow, not just with the physical presence of the cats, but with the connections they had brought into her life. Phone calls from her daughter, visits from neighbors, conversations with strangers who had been touched by Tilt's story. As she prepared for bed, Darlene realized that something fundamental had shifted in her world. The grief that had defined her existence for so long had not disappeared. It never would. But it had made room for something new, something unexpected and precious. Tilt and Fennel settled into their now-established sleeping spots, Fennel on the pillow beside Darlene's head, Tilt at the foot of the bed, his body positioned so he could see both the bedroom door and his small charge. "Good night, my heroes," Darlene whispered as she turned out the light. In the darkness, she heard Tilt's soft rumble of a purr, a sound she had come to recognize as his way of saying all was well with his world. And as sleep claimed her, Darlene Ellis, flower seller and now caretaker of Millfield's most famous feline residence, felt a deep sense of peace that had eluded her for far too long. Sunday dawned clear and bright, a perfect summer morning. Darlene woke to find Tilt already up, sitting on the windowsill and gazing out at the garden. Fennel was still curled beside her pillow, a small ball of black fur rising and falling with each breath. "What are you looking at so intently?" Darlene asked, joining Tilt at the window. Outside, the garden was coming alive with morning activity. Birds flitting between branches, squirrels chasing each other across the lawn. It struck Darlene that this was probably the first time in years that Tilt had been able to observe such scenes from the safety and comfort of a home. How different the world must look to him now, compared to his days of painful journeys and constant vigilance. The Sunday edition of the Sterling Tribune arrived with the morning mail, and there, on the front page of the lifestyle section, was Tilt's story. Rebecca Thornton had done a beautiful job, capturing not just the facts but the emotional heart of the tale. The photographs were striking. Tilt's golden eyes seemed to gaze directly at the reader, full of dignity despite his visible disability. "The measure of a hero, the remarkable journey of a disabled cat and his blind charge," Darlene read aloud. "My goodness, Tilt, they've made you sound like something out of a legend." The grey cat merely blinked at her, then returned to his window watching. By mid-morning the telephone had rung 3 times, friends and acquaintances calling to express their delight at seeing Darlene and Tilt in the regional newspaper. The third call, however, was different. "Ms. Ellis, this is Daniel Crawford from Healing Paws Foundation. I hope you don't mind my calling on a Sunday, but I just read the article about Tilt in the Tribune, and I wanted to reach out right away." Darlene listened as Daniel explained that Healing Paws was a non-profit organization dedicated to providing medical care and support for injured animals. They also ran educational programs about animal welfare and the special needs of disabled pets. "We would be honored if you and Tilt would consider participating in our outreach program," Daniel said. "Your story, his story, is exactly the kind of message we try to share. That disability doesn't define an animal's worth or capacity for love." I don't know," Darlene hesitated. "Tilt's never been one for crowds, and I'm certainly not a public speaker." "You wouldn't have to be," Daniel assured her. "We start small, visits to schools perhaps, or senior centers, places where Tilt's story might bring some joy and perspective. Think about it at least." After promising to consider the offer, Darlene hung up, her mind whirling with the unexpected turn of events. From abandoned stray to newspaper celebrity to potential therapy cat, Tilt's journey continued to unfold in ways she could never have imagined. Later that morning, as Darlene sat on her porch swing with a cup of tea, watching Tilt guide Fennel through a careful exploration of the garden, she found herself thinking about David. Her grandson had loved animals with the pure, uncomplicated affection of a child. How delighted he would have been by Tilt and Fennel. The thought brought tears to her eyes, but they weren't the sharp, painful tears of fresh grief. Instead, they felt like the gentle release of something long held too tightly, a letting go, not of memory, but of the pain that had encased it. "He would have loved you," she told Tilt softly. The grey cat looked up at her words, his golden eyes seeming to hold a depth of understanding that transcended the barrier between their species. Then he returned to his patient guidance of Fennel, who was cautiously batting at a dandelion with one small paw. The doorbell rang, interrupting Darlene's reverie. To her surprise, Dr. Marge Peterson stood on her porch, a folder in hand. "Hope I'm not disturbing your Sunday," Marge said. "I wanted to drop off some information about Tilt's condition, and, well, to talk to you about something else, too." Over coffee at Darlene's kitchen table, Marge explained that she had been looking through George Wilson's old case files. "I found Tilt's original records," she said, sliding a yellowed paper across the table. "His name was actually Grayson back then. Belonged to a man named Michael Thornton. No relation to the reporter, as far as I know." Darlene examined the form, noting the clinical description of Tilt's injuries. Complete fracture of the pelvis, damage to L4-L5 vertebrae, prognosis, permanent gait impairment likely. "It's remarkable he survived at all," Marge continued. "The kind of trauma he experienced, most cats wouldn't have made it. George always said he had an exceptional will to live." "He still does," Darlene murmured, watching as Tilt supervised Fennel's exploration of a sunbeam on the kitchen floor. Marge nodded. "That's partly what I wanted to talk to you about. I've been thinking about Tilt's story, about how it's resonated with so many people. It occurred to me that there might be a way to use that response to help other animals in similar situations. She outlined her idea, a special fund at the veterinary clinic, dedicated to providing care for injured strays and support for people who adopted disabled animals. They would call it the Tilt Fund. You and Tilt would be the figureheads, so to speak, Marge explained. Your story would inspire donations, and every penny would go to helping animals that might otherwise be overlooked or euthanized because of their special needs. Darlene considered the proposal thoughtfully. It's a wonderful idea, Marge, but I'm not sure I'm the right person to spearhead something like this. I'm just a flower seller. You're the person Tilt chose to trust, Marge said simply. That's recommendation enough for me. After Marge left, Darlene sat for a long time at her kitchen table, the proposal and Tilt's old medical records spread before her. She thought about the calls she'd received, the visits to the flower stand, Daniel Crawford's invitation, and now Marge's proposal. It was as if Tilt's story had opened a floodgate of compassion and connection that had been waiting to flow through the community. But was she ready to step into the role these opportunities seemed to be calling her toward? For so long, she had kept to herself, tending her flowers and her grief with equal care, allowing neither to spill beyond the boundaries she had set. A soft pressure against her ankle brought her out of her thoughts. Tilt had approached silently and was now sitting beside her chair, his golden eyes fixed on her face with that uncanny perception she had come to recognize. "What do you think, old friend?" she asked him. "Are we ready for this new chapter?" In response, Tilt placed one paw on her foot, as if in reassurance or encouragement. The simple gesture brought fresh tears to Darlene's eyes. "You've never stopped moving forward, have you? Despite everything, you just kept going, one painful step after another, because someone needed you." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I could learn a thing or two from you about courage." The rest of Sunday passed quietly. Darlene spent the afternoon in her garden, with Tilt and Fennel keeping her company as she tended to her flowers. The physical activity helped clear her mind, and by evening she had reached a decision. After dinner, she called Marge Peterson. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said, when the veterinarian answered. "I'd like to help with the Tilt Fund if you still want me to." Marge's delight was evident even over the telephone. "That's wonderful, Darlene. I'll start putting things together right away. Maybe we could meet later this week to discuss the details." Next, Darlene called Daniel Crawford at the Healing Paws Foundation. "I've been considering your invitation," she told him. "I think Tilt and I would like to try a visit to one of your programs to see how it goes." "Excellent," Daniel exclaimed. "I have the perfect opportunity. A small group at the Children's Hospital in Sterling. It's just a handful of kids, all long-term patients. They'd be thrilled to meet Tilt." By the time Darlene prepared for bed that night, she felt a mixture of trepidation and excitement about the path she had chosen. It would take her far outside her comfort zone, but something about it felt right, as if Tilt had led her not just to Fennel, but to a new purpose she hadn't known she was seeking. "What adventures await us?" she murmured to Tilt as he settled at the foot of her bed, his golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. Monday morning brought a return to routine. Darlene at her flower stand, Tilt and Fennel beside her in what had become their usual spots. But there was a new energy in the air, a sense of anticipation that made even the familiar feel fresh. The first customer of the day was Clara Bennett, the elderly woman whose grandson had cerebral palsy. She arrived carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For Tilt," she explained, handing it to Darlene. "My grandson made it himself." Inside was a carefully crafted cat toy, a small felt mouse with a bell inside. A note in childish handwriting read, "For Tilt, the bravest cat, from Joey, who also walks different." Darlene was touched by the gift. "Please thank Joey for me." "For us," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell him Tilt is honored by his thoughtfulness." Clara nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Joey hasn't stopped talking about Tilt since I showed him the article. He says if a cat can be brave about how he walks, so can he." Throughout the morning, more people stopped by, some to buy flowers, others simply to see Tilt and share how his story had affected them. Each conversation added another thread to the tapestry of connection that was forming around the remarkable grey cat and his blind companion. Around noon, a sleek silver car pulled into the parking lot, and a well-dressed man emerged. He approached the flower stand with purpose, his gaze immediately finding Tilt. "Miss Ellis, I'm Michael Thornton." He extended his hand. "I believe you have my cat." Darlene felt as if the ground had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. "You're Tilt's original owner?" The man nodded, his expression unreadable. "I saw the article in the Tribune yesterday." Recognized him immediately, despite the years. Tilt had gone utterly still, his golden eyes fixed on the newcomer with an intensity that made Darlene's heart race. Would he recognize this man who had abandoned him? And if he did, how would he react? "May I?" Michael Thornton asked, gesturing toward Tilt. Darlene hesitated, her protective instincts flaring. "He's been through a lot," she said carefully. "Doctor, Wilson told me how you left him at the clinic after the accident." A shadow crossed Michael's face. "Yes, that was a mistake, one I've regretted for a long time." He looked directly at Tilt. "I was young, struggling financially. The cost of his surgery, the ongoing care he would need, I convinced myself he'd be better off being put down. But then, when Dr. Wilson refused, I just left. Couldn't face making the decision either way." He took a step closer to the flower stand. "I'm not here to take him back, Mrs. Ellis. I can see he has a home with you. I just needed to see him to know he was all right." Darlene studied the man's face, searching for sincerity. What she saw was genuine regret, and something else, a weariness that spoke of his own struggles in the years since he had abandoned Tilt. "All right," she said finally. "But it's up to him whether he wants anything to do with you." To her surprise, Tilt rose from his cushion and approached the edge of the flower stand, his gaze never leaving Michael's face. There was no fear in his posture, no aggression, just a calm, measured assessment. Michael knelt slowly, bringing himself to Tilt's eye level. "Hello, old friend," he said softly. "You've done well for yourself, I see." For a long moment Tilt remained motionless, his golden eyes reflecting nothing of his thoughts. Then, with deliberate dignity, he turned and walked back to his cushion, settling beside Fennel, who had been sleeping through the entire encounter. Michael straightened up, a sad smile touching his lips. "Well, I got my answer. Can't say I blame him." "He's moved on," Darlene said, not unkindly. "As we all must." Michael nodded. "Yes, that's what I came to see, I think, that he had found his way forward despite what I did." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the counter. "If he ever needs anything, medical care, special food, anything at all, please call me. It's the least I can do." After Michael left, Darlene sat quietly beside Tilt, her hand resting lightly on his back. "That took courage," she told him, "to face the past without bitterness. You continue to teach me, my friend." Tilt merely blinked at her, then turned his attention to Fennel, who was beginning to stir from her nap. But Darlene thought she detected a new lightness in his movements, as if some invisible burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The encounter with Michael Thornton had been unexpected, but it had brought a kind of closure, not just for Tilt, but for Darlene as well. It reminded her that the past, with all its pain and regret, could not be changed, but it need not define the future. As the afternoon sun slanted across the parking lot, casting long shadows on the pavement, Darlene found herself looking forward with a sense of purpose she had not felt in years. Tomorrow would bring a visit to the Children's Hospital with Daniel Crawford. The day after, a meeting with Marge about the Tilt Fund. And beyond that, who knew what paths would open before them? One thing was certain. She would not walk those paths alone. She would have Tilt beside her, with his tilted gait and his golden eyes full of quiet wisdom. And Fennel, too, finding her way in a world of darkness with boundless courage and trust. Together, they would move forward, step by step, day by day. Not forgetting the past, but not imprisoned by it either. Finding new purposes, new connections, new reasons to rise each morning and face whatever challenges the day might bring. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the town of Millfield, Darlene packed up her flower stand with a heart full of gratitude for the unexpected gifts life had brought her, in the form of a grey cat with a tilted walk, and the truth he had helped her to see. The children's ward at Sterling Memorial Hospital was painted in cheerful yellows and blues, with murals of friendly animals adorning the walls. Despite these efforts to create a welcoming environment, there was no disguising the essential nature of the place, a home for children battling serious illnesses, some of whom had been there for months or even years. Darlene felt a flutter of nervousness as she followed Daniel Crawford down the corridor, Tilt secure in a special carrier designed to give him a clear view of his surroundings. They had left Fennel at home with Rick, who had eagerly volunteered to cat-sit, while Darlene and Tilt made their first official appearance as Healing Paws representatives. "The children are very excited to meet Tilt," Daniel told her as they approached the ward's common room. "We've been reading them the newspaper stories about him." "I just hope he behaves himself," Darlene murmured, though in truth she wasn't worried about Tilt. His calmness and dignity had never failed, even in the most challenging situations. It was her own composure she was concerned about. The last time she had been in a children's ward had been during David's illness, and the memories were still painful. The common room was arranged in a semicircle of comfortable chairs and beanbags, with 5 children already waiting. Their ages ranged from about 6 to 13, and their conditions were evident in various ways. Some were in wheelchairs, others had IV stands beside them, and one small girl wore a bright headscarf that spoke of chemotherapy treatments. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Ms. Ellis and Tilt," Daniel announced cheerfully. "They've come all the way from Millfield to visit with you today." The children's faces lit up with genuine excitement. Darlene felt her nervousness melt away in the warmth of their welcome. "Is it true he saved a blind kitten?" asked a boy with wire-rimmed glasses and thin arms marked with needle tracks. "Yes, that's right," Darlene replied, settling into an empty chair and placing Tilt's carrier on her lap. "He took care of Fennel, that's the kitten, all by himself, even though his own injuries make it difficult for him to walk." "Can we see him walk?" asked the girl in the headscarf, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Of course," Darlene said, opening the carrier door. "Tilt, would you like to come out and meet everyone?" To her relief, Tilt emerged from the carrier with his usual dignity, pausing to survey the room and its occupants. Then, with deliberate steps that clearly showed his tilted gait, he made his way to the center of the semicircle. A collective "ooh" rose from the children, not of mockery but of genuine fascination and respect. "Does it hurt him?" asked a girl in a wheelchair, her legs encased in complex braces. "Sometimes, yes," Darlene answered honestly, "but he doesn't let that stop him from doing what's important to him." "Like taking care of Fennel," nodded the boy with the glasses. "Exactly." For the next hour, Darlene and Tilt engaged with the children, answering questions demonstrating how Tilt had taught Fennel to navigate without sight and simply providing the comfort of their presence. Tilt, to Darlene's pride, but not her surprise, seemed to intuitively understand which children needed his attention most. He spent extra time with the quietest ones, allowing them to stroke his fur and find solace in the simple, uncomplicated connection. As their visit drew to a close, the girl in the wheelchair asked a question that caught Darlene off guard. "Ms. Ellis, why do you think Tilt didn't just give up? After he got hurt, I mean. It would have been easier, wouldn't it?" Darlene considered the question carefully, aware of the deeper currents beneath it. This child, with her own daily struggles, was asking about something fundamental, the choice to continue in the face of pain and difficulty. "I think," Darlene said slowly, "that Tilt found something more important than his own comfort. He found a purpose, caring for Fennel, and that purpose gave him the strength to keep going, one day at a time." The girl nodded, her young face serious. "That's what my mom says about me, that I'm brave because I keep going, but sometimes I don't feel brave. Sometimes I just feel tired." Darlene's heart ached at the simple honesty of the child's words. "I think that's when we're the bravest of all," she said gently. "When we're tired, but we keep going anyway. Tilt gets tired too, I'm sure. But each morning, he gets up and does what needs to be done." The girl considered this, then reached out to stroke Tilt's fur one more time. "I'm glad he found you," she said. "Everyone needs someone who understands." The drive back to Millfield was quiet. Darlene lost in thought, Tilt dozing in his carrier on the passenger seat. The visit had affected her more deeply than she had anticipated, stirring memories of David, but also revealing new depths to Tilt's impact on those around him. "You have a gift," she told the sleeping cat. "You help people see beyond the surface, beyond limitations to the heart beneath." When they arrived home, Rick was waiting on the porch, Fennel perched contentedly on his shoulder like a tiny black parrot. "How'd it go?" he asked eagerly, as Darlene released Tilt from his carrier. "Wonderfully," she replied, watching as Tilt immediately went to check on Fennel, who mewed happily at his return. Those children, they understood Tilt in a way that many adults don't. They saw past his disability to his strength. Rick nodded, gently transferring Fennel from his shoulder to Tilt's care. Kids are like that sometimes. They see what's real. The following day brought another new experience, the first official meeting about the Tilt Fund at Marge Peterson's veterinary clinic. Darlene had left Tilt and Fennel at home this time, feeling that her presence alone would be sufficient for what promised to be a business-like discussion of logistics and planning. To her surprise, the small conference room at the clinic was full. Marge had invited not just her staff, but also representatives from local animal welfare organizations, the editor of the Millfield Gazette, and several community leaders. "Word has spread," Marge explained, as she ushered Darlene to a seat at the head of the table. "People are excited about what we're trying to do here." The meeting began with introductions, followed by Marge's presentation of the proposed structure for the Tilt Fund. It would provide financial assistance for the medical care of injured strays, support for families adopting disabled animals, and educational outreach about the special needs and special gifts of animals with disabilities. "And Ms. Ellis and Tilt will be our ambassadors," Marge concluded, sharing their story to inspire donations and awareness. Darlene listened, somewhat overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. When it came her turn to speak, she found herself uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "I'm just a flower seller," she began hesitantly. "I don't know much about fundraising or public speaking, but I do know that Tilt has changed my life, and not just because he led me to Fennel. He's reminded me that life doesn't stop because of injury or loss or pain. It continues, and so must we." Her simple words seemed to resonate with the group. By the end of the meeting, committees had been formed, preliminary plans had been made, and a launch date for the Tilt Fund had been set for the following month. As Darlene walked home through the golden afternoon light, she reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. If she hadn't noticed Tilt's daily journey across the parking lot, if she hadn't followed him that rainy night, if she hadn't opened her home and her heart to him and Fennel, how different her life would be now. "Ms. Ellis." The call came from across the street, where Clara Bennett was emerging from the grocery store. She hurried over, her face alight with news. "I wanted to tell you, Joey's been invited to speak at his school assembly next week, about courage and being different. It's all because of that article about Tilt. Joey showed it to his teacher, and she thought it would be wonderful if he shared his connection to the story." Darlene smiled, genuinely pleased for the boy she had never met, but whose struggle she could understand. "That's wonderful, Clara. Please tell Joey that Tilt and I are very proud of him." "Actually," Clara said, her eyes twinkling, "Joey was hoping that perhaps Tilt might be able to come to the assembly too. As a special guest, you see, the principal has already approved it." By the time Darlene reached her cottage, her mind was whirling with the day's events and the growing list of commitments that had sprung from Tilt's story. A school assembly next week, another visit to the children's hospital the week after, the official launch of the Tilt Fund at the end of the month. Her quiet life had suddenly become remarkably full. As she opened her front door, she was greeted by a sight that made her heart swell with affection. Tilt and Fennel were curled together on the window seat, the afternoon sun bathing them in golden light. The black kitten was nestled against Tilt's side, her tiny form rising and falling with each breath. Tilt's eyes were half closed in contentment, but he opened them fully at Darlene's entrance, acknowledging her return with a slow blink that cat lovers recognize as a sign of trust and affection. "Hello, my heroes," she said softly, dropping her bag and moving to join them on the window seat. "You've had quite an impact on our little town, do you know that?" Tilt shifted slightly to make room for her, his body warm against her side as she settled beside them. Fennel, disturbed by the movement, let out a tiny mew of protest before snuggling closer to Tilt and resuming her nap. Through the window, Darlene could see her garden, the roses she had planted after Harold's death, the small bench where she sometimes sat in the evenings, the bird feeder that attracted a colorful array of visitors. It was the same view she had looked upon for decades, yet somehow it seemed different now, richer, more vibrant, more alive with possibility. Or perhaps it was she who had changed, awakened from a long winter of grief by the unexpected gift of two broken, beautiful creatures who had somehow made her own broken places feel less empty. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the garden, Darlene felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, The public appearances, the fundraising efforts, the constant reminders of her own losses, she would face them with the same quiet determination that Tilt demonstrated every day. One step at a time, one day at a time, moving forward, not with the expectation of perfection, but with the commitment to do what mattered most, regardless of the difficulty. In the warm golden light of the setting sun, a flower seller, a disabled cat, and a blind kitten sat together on a window seat, bound by something stronger than blood or circumstance, a connection forged in compassion, nurtured by understanding, and sustained by love. It wasn't the family Darlene had expected to have in her later years, but as Tilt's warmth seeped into her side and Fennel's tiny purr filled the quiet room, she knew with absolute certainty that it was the family she needed. Outside, the world continued its relentless pace. People hurried to destinations unknown. Cars filled the streets. Life moved with its characteristic urgency. But in Darlene's cottage on Maple Street, time seemed to slow, allowing space for healing, for growth, for the gentle unfurling of new beginnings. What would tomorrow bring? More challenges, certainly. More opportunities for connection and purpose. More chances to share Tilt's story and the universal truths it contained, that the measure of a life is not in its physical perfection, but in its capacity for love. That the most profound strength often emerges from the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the most heroic act of all is simply to keep moving forward, one difficult step after another, because someone else is counting on you to find your way. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Darlene Ellis, flower seller and unlikely catalyst for change, closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the grey cat with the tilted walk who had transformed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. 1 month after Tilt's first appearance in the Millfield Gazette, the town's community centre was filled to capacity. People spilled out onto the lawn, craning their necks to see through the open doors and windows. Inside, chairs had been arranged in neat rows facing a small stage adorned with a banner that read, "The Tilt Fund, supporting special needs animals and the humans who love them." In the front row sat Darlene, her hands folded nervously in her lap. Beside her, in a specially designed carrier that allowed him to see the proceedings, Tilt watched the gathering crowd with his usual calm attentiveness. Fennel, now sporting a tiny red collar with a bell, courtesy of Rick, was curled in a small basket at Darlene's feet, occasionally batting at a toy mouse that Joey Bennett had made for her. "Nervous?" asked Marge Peterson, taking the seat beside Darlene. "Terrified," Darlene admitted with a small smile. "Public speaking was never my forte." "Just speak from the heart," Marge advised. "That's what people want to hear anyway. Not polished rhetoric, but genuine feeling." Before Darlene could respond, Emma Parker from the Gazette approached, notepad in hand. "Big turnout," she observed, glancing around the packed room. "Seems like half the county is here." "I never expected anything like this," Darlene said, still amazed by the community's response to Tilt's story. "It's just a fund for injured animals." Emma shook her head. "It's much more than that, Darlene. It's about seeing value in what others might discard. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most broken among us have the most to give." She nodded toward Tilt. "He's become a symbol of something people desperately need right now. Hope in the face of hardship, purpose beyond pain." As Emma moved away to find a seat, Daniel Crawford took the stage, tapping the microphone to quiet the murmuring crowd. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice warm and engaging. "Thank you all for coming tonight to support the launch of the Tilt Fund." For those who might have been living under a rock for the past month, this drew a ripple of laughter. Tilt is the remarkable grey cat who, despite his own severe injuries, cared for a blind kitten and, in doing so, captured the hearts of our community. He went on to explain the purpose of the fund and to introduce the various organizations that had partnered with Marge Peterson's clinic to make it a reality. Then he turned toward the front row. "And now I'd like to invite Darlene Ellis, the woman who discovered Tilt's secret and opened her home to both him and little Fennel, to share a few words with us." Darlene rose on slightly shaky legs and made her way to the stage. She had never been comfortable with public speaking, and the sea of faces before her did nothing to calm her nerves. But as she took her place behind the microphone, she caught sight of Tilt in his carrier, his golden eyes fixed on her with that familiar, calm assurance. Drawing strength from his steady gaze, she began to speak. A little over a month ago, I was a widow who sold flowers and kept mostly to herself, she said simply. I had experienced losses that left me diminished somehow, less engaged with the world around me. And then I met Tilt. She told the story as it had unfolded, her curiosity about the cat's daily journey, the discovery of Fennel in the abandoned shed, the gradual understanding of Tilt's remarkable devotion despite his own injuries. What Tilt taught me, what he continues to teach me every day, is that our limitations need not define us, that even in our brokenness we have something valuable to offer, that the most profound strength often emerges from the deepest wounds. As she spoke, Darlene felt a strange sensation, as if the weight she had carried for so long was lifting slightly, not disappearing. Grief was never truly gone, but shifting, making room for something new to grow alongside it. The Tilt Fund is not just about helping injured animals, though that is certainly its primary purpose, she continued. It's also about recognizing the capacity for healing that exists within all of us, animals and humans alike. It's about seeing beyond the surface to the heart beneath. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence, followed by applause that seemed to fill every corner of the room. Darlene returned to her seat, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and quiet pride. The evening continued with other speakers, including Joey Bennett, who spoke bravely about his own physical challenges and how Tilt's story had inspired him. When he finished, many in the audience were wiping away tears. As the formal program concluded and people began to move about, visiting the information tables set up around the perimeter of the room, Darlene found herself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. "Your speech was beautiful," said Clara Bennett, clasping Darlene's hand. "Joey was so nervous about speaking tonight, but seeing you up there, someone else who isn't used to the spotlight, gave him courage." "He did wonderfully," Darlene assured her. "Tilt and I are very proud of him." More people approached, some to share their own stories of beloved pets who had overcome disabilities, others to make donations to the fund, and still others simply to express their appreciation for what Tilt's story had meant to them. Among the crowd, Darlene spotted a familiar face, Michael Thornton, Tilt's original owner. He approached cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. "That was quite a speech," he said. "Quite an evening, in fact. I wanted to add my contribution to the fund." He handed her an envelope. "It's not much, but perhaps it will help another cat like Tilt get the care they need." Darlene accepted the envelope with a nod of acknowledgement. "Thank you, Michael. That's very generous." He glanced at Tilt, who was now being admired by a group of children under Rick's watchful supervision. "He looks well," Michael observed. "Happy, even." "I'm glad he found you." "I think we found each other," Darlene replied, "at a time when we both needed someone to remind us that life goes on, even after loss." Michael nodded, a shadow of old regret passing across his face. "Yes, it does at that." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Miss Ellis, for giving him what I couldn't. A second chance." As the evening drew to a close and the last of the visitors departed, Darlene sat alone on the edge of the stage, Tilt and Fennel beside her. The community center was quiet now, littered with the evidence of the evening's success. Donation envelopes stacked neatly on a table, informational brochures about the Tilt Fund scattered across chairs, a few forgotten coffee cups on windowsills. "Well," she said to her feline companions, "we did it." Marge Peterson approached, her face flushed with excitement. "We didn't just do it, Darlene. We exceeded all expectations. The initial donations alone will fund the program for at least a year, and we've got pledges for ongoing support." She sat down beside Darlene, her energy finally flagging after the busy evening. "You know, when I first proposed this idea, I thought it might help a few animals in need. I never imagined—" She gestured around the room, indicating the scale of the response. "Neither did I," Darlene admitted. "It's been overwhelming in the best possible way. That's what happens when a story touches something universal," Marge said thoughtfully. "Tilt's journey. It's about more than just a cat who overcame adversity. It's about finding purpose in pain, about moving forward when it would be easier to give up." She glanced at Darlene. "I think that's why it resonates with so many people. We all carry our own wounds, visible or not." Darlene nodded, thinking of her own hidden griefs, Harold's death, David's illness, the quiet emptiness of the years that followed. And yet, Here she was, sitting on a stage after addressing a packed room, her heart fuller than it had been in longer than she could remember. "Tilt didn't just save Fennel," she said softly. "In a way, he saved me too." The grey cat, as if understanding her words, pressed his warm body against her side. Fennel, not to be outdone, climbed into her lap and began to purr loudly. "I'd say it was a mutual rescue," Marge observed with a smile. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Rick appeared at the door, slightly out of breath. "Miss Ellis, I'm glad you're still here. There's someone outside who really wants to meet Tilt." Curious, Darlene followed Rick to the community center's entrance. There, waiting in the soft glow of the porch light, was a young woman in a wheelchair. Beside her stood a man about her age, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "This is Sarah and her fiancé, Tom," Rick explained. "They drove all the way from Sterling to be here tonight, but the crowd was too much for them to get through. I promised I'd see if you were still here." Sarah's face lit up at the sight of Tilt in his carrier. "Oh, he's just as handsome as in the pictures. May I?" She reached toward the carrier door with hands that showed the slight tremor of muscular dystrophy. "Of course," Darlene said, kneeling to open the carrier. Tilt emerged with his usual dignity, pausing to assess the newcomers before approaching Sarah's wheelchair. With surprising grace, he leapt onto her lap, settling there as if he had known her all his life. "Oh!" Sarah's delight was palpable. "He's so warm, so solid." Tom smiled at his fiancée's joy. "Sarah's been following Tilt's story since the first article appeared. She says he reminds her of herself, finding ways to adapt, refusing to be defined by limitations." Sarah stroked Tilt's fur with gentle fingers. "I was diagnosed when I was 12, she told Darlene. "The doctors told my parents I'd probably not live to see 30. Well, here I am at 32 planning my wedding." She glanced up at Tom with a smile that transformed her face. "Like your Tilt, I just kept going one day at a time." As Sarah and Tom spoke with Darlene, sharing their own story of resilience and hope, Fennel grew restless in her basket. Rick lifted her out, placing her carefully on Sarah's lap beside Tilt. "This is Fennel," he explained, "the blind kitten that Tilt was caring for." "Hello, little one," Sarah murmured, her fingers finding the tiny black kitten. "You're very fortunate to have such a dedicated protector." Fennel mewed in response, her paws kneading the air as she adjusted to this new person. Then, with the unerring instinct of the very young, she curled against Sarah's stomach and began to purr. "I think she likes you," Darlene observed. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You know, I've always wanted a cat, but I worried about being able to care for one properly, with my condition." She looked down at Fennel, then up at Tom. "But seeing these two, how they managed despite their challenges," Tom nodded, understanding her unspoken thought. "Maybe we should reconsider," he said gently. "After the wedding, once we're settled in the new apartment." The conversation continued for some time, as stars appeared in the night sky above Millfield, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of late summer flowers. When at last Sarah and Tom prepared to leave, Sarah took Darlene's hand in her own. "Thank you," she said simply, "for sharing Tilt with the world. His story is like it matters. It matters to people like me, who sometimes need a reminder that the most beautiful journeys often begin with a single, difficult step." As Darlene watched their car pull away, Tilt solid and warm in her arms, she felt a deep sense of rightness settle over her. This connection, this sharing of story and struggle and triumph, this was what Tilt's journey had been leading toward all along. Not just his rescue of Fennel, not just his transformation of Darlene's quiet life, but this ripple effect of hope that was spreading outward in ever-widening circles, touching lives she would never even know about. The walk home was peaceful, the streets of Millfield quiet under a canopy of stars. Darlene carried Fennel in her basket, while Tilt walked beside her, his swaying gait somehow less pronounced in the gentle darkness. "You've become quite the celebrity," she told him. "A symbol of resilience and hope for people you've never even met." The grey cat merely continued his steady pace, his golden eyes occasionally glancing up at her as if to say, "I'm just being who I am. Nothing more, nothing less." And perhaps that was the most profound lesson of all, Darlene reflected, that true heroism didn't announce itself with fanfare or seek recognition. It simply did what needed to be done, day after day, with quiet determination and unwavering purpose. As they approached her cottage on Maple Street, Darlene noticed something unusual, a small gathering of people on her front porch. For a moment she hesitated, wondering if this was yet another group of well-wishers wanting to meet Tilt. Then she recognized the central figure, Catherine, her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in person for nearly 2 years. "Mom!" Catherine called, hurrying down the path to meet them. "Surprise!" Darlene's heart leapt at the sight of her only child. "Catherine, what are you doing here? You didn't tell me you were coming." Catherine embraced her mother warmly. "I wanted to surprise you, and to meet the famous Tilt and Fennel, of course. I've been following all the news online." She knelt to greet Tilt, who regarded her with his usual careful assessment before allowing her to stroke his fur. "So this is the remarkable fellow who's changed your life," she said, looking up at Darlene with a smile. "He's exactly as you described him." "And who are all these people?" Darlene asked, indicating the others waiting on her porch. "Oh, I brought reinforcements," Catherine laughed. "This is my friend Lisa. She's a professional photographer. She's offered to take proper portraits of Tilt and Fennel for the Tilt Fund publicity materials. And this is Mark, my colleague from work. He's a web designer and wants to create a website for the fund. And this," she pulled forward a tall, bearded man who had been standing somewhat shyly at the back of the group, "is Robert, my fiancé." Darlene blinked in surprise. "Your fiancé? But you never mentioned—" "It's recent," Catherine admitted, "and I wanted to tell you in person. After reading about how you've opened your heart and home to Tilt and Fennel, I realized life is too short to keep important things at a distance. So here we are, all of us ready to help with this wonderful project you've started." Inside the cottage, over cups of tea and plates of hastily assembled sandwiches, Catherine and her friends shared their ideas for expanding the reach of the Tilt Fund. Lisa's photographs would create professional materials for fundraising. Mark's website would allow donations and applications for assistance from anywhere in the country. And Robert, it turned out, worked for a publisher who was interested in creating a children's book based on Tilt's story. "A book?" Darlene asked, overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. "About Tilt?" Robert nodded enthusiastically. Kids love animal stories, especially ones with a message of overcoming challenges, and the fact that it's true makes it even more powerful. As the discussion continued, Darlene found herself watching her daughter with new eyes. Catherine seemed different somehow, more animated, more present than she had been in years. The wall of careful distance that had grown between them after David's death seemed to have thinned, allowing glimpses of the close relationship they had once shared. Was this another of Tilt's quiet miracles, Darlene wondered? Had his story somehow bridged the gap that grief had created between mother and daughter? Later, after Catherine's friends had departed for their hotel, and Catherine herself had settled into the guest room, Darlene sat on the porch swing, enjoying the cool night air. Tilt joined her, jumping onto the swing with surprising agility for a cat with his condition. "You approve of all this, do you?" she asked him as he settled beside her, his warm weight against her thigh. "The fund, the website, the book?" Tilt blinked slowly, his golden eyes reflecting the porch light. Then he stretched, his body relaxing into the gentle motion of the swing. "I'll take that as a yes," Darlene said with a smile. From inside the house came the soft sounds of Catherine moving about, preparing for bed. The familiar domestic noises filled Darlene with a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in years. Her daughter was here. Her home was full. Her life, which had narrowed to a careful routine of solitude and memory, had suddenly expanded to include new possibilities, new connections, new purpose. And it had all begun with a grey cat with a tilted walk, crossing a parking lot on a mission of love. In the weeks and months that followed, the Tilt Fund grew beyond anything Darlene had imagined. The website Mark created received donations from across the country. Lisa's photographs of Tilt and Fennel, capturing both their physical challenges and their evident bond, became the face of the fund's campaign materials. Robert's children's book, Tilt's Journey, was published to enthusiastic reviews and quickly became a favorite in elementary schools and libraries. Its simple message, that true strength comes from caring for others despite one's own limitations, resonated with children and adults alike. Darlene found herself busier than she had been in decades. She still ran her flower stand at Ruther's Market, but now she also visited schools with Tilt, spoke at veterinary conferences about the special needs of disabled animals, and oversaw the growing operations of the Tilt Fund. Catherine visited more frequently, sometimes bringing Robert, sometimes coming alone for quiet weekends with her mother. The distance between them, created by shared grief too painful to acknowledge, gradually closed as they found new common ground in the work of the fund and the daily care of Tilt and Fennel. Tilt himself seemed to thrive on his new role as ambassador. His calm dignity in the face of curious crowds, his patient tolerance of children's excited attention, and his unwavering devotion to Fennel made him the perfect representative for the cause he had inadvertently created. Fennel, too, grew and changed. No longer the tiny, vulnerable kitten Tilt had protected in the abandoned shed, she became a confident young cat who navigated her world of darkness with remarkable ease. Her blindness seemed less a disability than simply another way of being, a different perspective on the world around her. 1 year after the night Darlene had followed Tilt to the abandoned hardware store, she sat in her garden, watching as Tilt guided Fennel through an exploration of a new flower bed. Catherine and Robert, visiting for the weekend, sat nearby, their hands clasped together as they discussed wedding plans. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the flower stand when you retire, Mom?" Catherine asked. "You've been talking about cutting back your hours for months now." Darlene considered the question. The flower stand had been her anchor for so many years, her connection to the community, her reason to rise each morning after Harold's death and then David's illness. But now, with the Tilt Fund and all its associated activities, she found herself with less time and energy for the daily work of selling flowers. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "It's hard to imagine letting it go entirely." "What about a partnership?" Robert suggested. "Someone to handle the day-to-day operations while you oversee the larger picture. That way you could focus more on the fund without giving up the flower business completely." Before Darlene could respond, the garden gate opened and Rick appeared, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Ms. Ellis," he said, his face flushed with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I just wanted to show you these. Found them growing by the creek behind the market. Thought they might look nice at the flower stand." Darlene looked at the young man, who had once mocked Tilt's disability, but had since become one of his most devoted advocates. Rick had graduated from high school in the spring and was taking classes at the community college, studying botany and environmental science. "They're beautiful, Rick," she said, accepting the bouquet. "You have a good eye for this." An idea began to form in her mind, a solution that felt right in a way she couldn't quite articulate. "Rick, have you ever thought about running a flower stand yourself?" The young man's eyes widened. "Me? I don't know anything about the business side of things, Ms. Ellis." "You could learn," she said gently, "and I could teach you. Maybe we could start with you working more hours, taking on more responsibility, and eventually, when you're ready—" She let the thought hang in the air between them. Rick's face lit up with unexpected hope. "You'd trust me with that? After how I used to act, the way I treated Tilt?" "People change," Darlene said simply. "Sometimes all it takes is seeing something, or someone, with new eyes." As Rick left, promising to think about her proposal, Catherine squeezed her mother's hand. "That was a wonderful idea, Mom. He clearly loves the flowers as much as you do. And he's been good with Tilt and Fennel," Darlene added. "That says a lot about a person, I think, how they treat those who are vulnerable." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the garden. Tilt, sensing the change in the light, guided Fennel back toward the porch steps. His gait was still tilted, his back legs still moved with the slight tremor that marked his old injury, but there was a fluidity to his movement now, a grace that came from acceptance and adaptation. "You know," Catherine said, watching the two cats, "when I first read about Tilt in the newspaper, I thought it was a nice story about a remarkable cat. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's about how we all find our way forward, step by step, sometimes helping others, sometimes allowing ourselves to be helped." Darlene nodded, thinking of all the paths that had led to this moment. Tilt's daily journey across the parking lot, her own decision to follow him that rainy night, the discovery of Fennel in the abandoned shed. Each step, each choice, had created the path they now walked together. A Chinese proverb says, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step," she said, "but I think there's more to it than that. I think the path itself is made by walking, by each step we choose to take day after day, even when it's difficult. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared in the evening sky, Darlene Ellis sat in her garden, surrounded by the family she had found in the most unexpected places. Her daughter and future son-in-law, a grey cat with a tilted walk, a blind kitten who saw with her heart. Life had not turned out as she had once planned. There had been losses too deep to forget, grief too profound to ever fully leave behind, but there had also been discoveries, connections, new beginnings that she could never have anticipated. And at the center of it all was Tilt, a broken, abandoned creature who had somehow found the courage to keep going, one painful step after another, because someone needed him. In the end, wasn't that what it meant to be truly alive? Not to avoid pain or seek perfect comfort, but to find purpose beyond oneself, to keep moving forward even when the path seemed impossible, to trust that each step, however difficult, was creating the way. As Tilt and Fennel settled on either side of her, their presence warm and reassuring in the gathering darkness, Darlene felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her, for the unexpected gifts life had brought her, for second chances and new beginnings, for the grey cat with the tilted walk who had taught her, and so many others, that the truest measure of strength was not in physical perfection, but in the capacity to love beyond one's own limitations. In the quiet garden, under a sky full of stars, a flower seller, a disabled cat and a blind kitten sat together in perfect understanding, their paths forever intertwined, their journey only just beginning. Epilogue. They still laugh sometimes, the new children who come to town and see Tilt for the first time. His walk is distinctive, undeniable, a swaying, tilted movement that catches the eye and sometimes prompts giggles or pointing fingers. But now when this happens, someone always steps forward. A market employee, a regular customer, sometimes even another child, to tell Tilt's story. To explain that his unusual gait is the mark of a hero, not an object of ridicule. To share how this grey cat with golden eyes once crossed a parking lot every day, in pain and hunger, not for himself, but for a blind kitten who depended on him. And then the laughter stops, replaced by something else, understanding, respect, perhaps even a small awakening to the truth that appearances can deceive, that strength comes in many forms, and that the most profound courage often walks quietly among us, unheralded and unrecognized. In the years since Tilt first appeared in the Millfield Gazette, his story has traveled far beyond the boundaries of the small town where it began. The Tilt Fund now operates in 3 states, providing support for hundreds of disabled animals and the humans who care for them. The children's book, inspired by his journey, has been translated into 12 languages, and Darlene Ellis, once a quiet widow who sold flowers and kept to herself, now speaks regularly at conferences about the healing power of the human-animal bond. But perhaps the most significant legacy of Tilt's story can be found in the countless private moments it has inspired. The shelter volunteer who gives a second look to the 3-legged dog others have passed by. The family who adopts a deaf cat, seeing beyond its limitation to its capacity for love. The child with a disability who finds in Tilt's journey a reflection of their own courage. At Ruther's Market, a new bench stands beside the entrance, near where Darlene's flower stand once operated, before Rick took over its management. The bench is beautifully crafted of polished wood with a small brass plaque that reads, "Not all heroes walk straight paths." In honor of Tilt, who taught us to see with our hearts. On sunny afternoons, visitors to the market often find Darlene sitting there, sometimes alone, sometimes with Tilt beside her, his golden eyes watching the world go by with the same calm dignity that has always been his hallmark. Fennel may be there too, now fully grown but still guided by Tilt's protective presence, her world of darkness illuminated by his unwavering love. They make an unusual trio, an elderly flower seller, a disabled cat, and a blind companion, each marked by life's hardships, each carrying invisible wounds alongside visible ones. But together they have created something remarkable, a testimony to the resilience of the spirit, a reminder that the most beautiful journeys often begin with broken steps. And so the story continues, not just in Millfield but wherever it is shared. A simple tale of a grey cat with a tilted walk who refused to let pain or limitation define him, who kept moving forward because someone needed him to find his way. In the end, Perhaps that is the greatest lesson Tilt has to teach us all. That the path of a hero is not made by great leaps or dramatic gestures, but by steady steps taken day after day, guided not by the desire for recognition or reward, but by the quiet, unwavering commitment to do what love requires no matter how difficult the journey might be.